Welcome back to another special episode of these DM clinics. I'm absolutely loving these. This is my good friend Sean Triner. Good morning, Sean. It's
Oh,
early. It's like six. Did you say it's 6:30 or something?
it's 6:20 now because we've been having a chat. But yes, and look, there's light. It was dark
The
before, but now.
light of the early Australian morning is appearing for Sean, and I've known Sean for some time, formerly of Pareto Fundraising. I've learned more than I can even begin to share through the years from you, Sean, and I've been always so appreciative of you, so forthcoming with all your knowledge, and I'm delighted that you're here to share some of it with me and whoever is watching this video today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
my pleasure.
Hopefully, some people watching are familiar with Oceanic now, my current company, my company. I set up with my partner, focused on training, same as really building that capacity among fundraisers.
Very good. Thank you, Sean. So you're going to talk about the importance of acquisition, and I'm going to listen, and then I might ask you a few questions.
Well, it's more of a twist on a purpose. We know that acquisition is important because we need to get more people in, or otherwise we die. And we see that when charities pull out of donor acquisition, if they're dependent on income from individual givers, their net income goes up for a bit because acquisition tends to cost more than you bring in the short term, and then it declines. But acquisition is just getting harder and harder. In the average donations are not keeping up with increasing cost, decreasing response rates, and therefore an increasing cost to get a donor on board in the first place. And that doesn't matter whether you are superb at your digital or your two-step or your phone or your mail or your face-to-face, whatever methods that you're using to bring in large volumes of donors. Unless you're a small organization like a local hospice or something where pretty much all of those channels are still pretty good. But if you're an established organization that's been doing lots and lots of donor acquisition over the last 10, 15 years, then you'll see how harder it constantly gets. And when you actually sit there and plug in the numbers, most of those channels and the latest benchmarking from Australia and New Zealand, which is comparable to the US and Canada, and the UK and Austria and all the other places I work with in Italy and Netherlands, we can see similar trends. But what this means is we might pull back from acquisition, and we see that a lot. People pull back, and then we see obviously that slight decline, increasing net, and then a bit of a plummet down. And I think the problem is short-termism. Basically, even 10 years ago when we actually were doing, you make profit in less than 2 years from acquisition. Even in those days, we were still being short-termist. And why are we short-termist? Well, there's a couple of things. One is boards tend to be conservative. They're protecting the money of the organization. They want to get as much money from their sources of beautiful people who are donating to the wonderful people, trees, dogs, cats, oceans, whatever needs that money now. And I think it should be a requirement if you're on a board to be impatient, right? So you should be impatient because kids are dying now, climate change is happening now. Well, whatever the particular thing is that you're working on, I think it's okay to be impatient, and you should be, because you're trying to make a difference. But there's still this difference as well. There's this kind of professional approach to that impatience where we go, but we still have to help kids, to help people with early diagnosis of cancer, whatever it is that you're trying to work on in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. So how do we make ourselves sustainable? So we've got to balance that. We've got to balance that cash flow and doing good and being an ethical organization and not just getting all this money in and not actually spending it on good with this long-term return, which is pretty challenging. So that's where it comes in. And when I'm looking at this acquisition, the average acquisition across the board of all of these charities is pretty poor. And if you were to include the costs of staff and training and offices and database systems and all those processes, most strategic volume, like over a couple of thousand monthly givers or 10,000 individual givers, when we're looking at those kind of scales, we're not really breaking even for 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. And when you actually look at that, you go, well, if I'd have just stuck that money in the bank, I'd have probably got about the same, but with hardly any risk. So that's the problem. Even when we're looking 3 or 4 years, which is actually a lot more than what most boards look at anyway. But if they're doing acquisition, they've had to look further in, and hopefully they're on top of the numbers. But actually, where the real value comes from your donor acquisition is not just from those direct marketing campaigns, emails, mails, will you be please, will you give us another dollar, or those retention campaigns to maintain those monthly givers. Those are all essential things, absolutely essential, and they do contribute to retention as well. But it's still marginal over the next 5-10 years on whether that was really a good idea, unless you're really, really good at your mid-value donor programs and your major donor programs, and most importantly of all, and it dwarfs everything else, and that is bequests or legacies or gifts in wills, whatever you want to call them. They are huge. And not long ago, I did this presentation called Star Wars, where we based it on Star Wars, lessons from Star Wars, we called it. And we looked at of donors acquired 12 years ago. All right, this is some numbers here just getting thrown at your audience. John probably should have warned you that I'm a mathematician, but over the last 12 years, we looked at, here was a direct mail pack that did really well and got 3,000 people to donate to that charity for the first time. Over the next 12 years, there was a cost, and there was in that first instance, they spent more than they got back in again because it was donor acquisition, so they were in the red. But then they recovered that revenue through further appeals while spending more. So whilst the spend was making the bottom line worse, that raising revenue, was bringing in net profit. So after a couple of years, they're making net profit, and over 12 years. They made about $1.3 million revenue at a cost of $360,000, better than leaving the money in the bank. But also, that was 12 years ago to now. It's harder now, but that did pretty well. 3,000 people, about 1,500 of them ever made a second gift. And 12 years later, 30 of them had died and left $3 million. And that was not an unusual case study for that organization. We could look at donors from 15 years ago. The only difference is more money from bequests. If we look at donors from 6 or 7 years ago, less bequests, just because, time gets us all. So it was just really fascinating to look at that and say, wow. So really, in all of our equations, when we were looking at donor acquisition, we've been looking at 5 years because which is pretty good because most charities don't even look that far ahead. So we've been looking at 5 years, and that wasn't enough to really capture where the real money is. So the 30 out of 3,000 people, so that literally is 1% of them, left $3 million compared to the $1.3 million that had come in from those 3,000 donors. Bottom line, 3 to 1 was the ratio. So 3,000 people gave X, and that 1% of those people, 30 of those people, gave 3X, more or less. That's just so huge. And that's why we really, really need to shift our thinking into really long-term stuff. And that's from mail. If we were looking at digital, then we're looking at kind of 15 to 30 years. And if we're looking at face-to-face, maybe even 20 to 40 years. Whereas with direct mail, we're normally looking at perhaps 7 to 20 years, just because direct mail donors are around 70 at acquisition. Maybe 69 and 72 if they give again. Age is one of the biggest indicators that someone's going to give again, older better. And the same with the monthly givers, but they're like 50-ish from digital, maybe 45-ish from face-to-face. So they're not going to die sooner, which is good on average. Obviously, we want these people to stay with us as long as they can, as long as they're fit and healthy. So we want to really make sure we maintain those relationships, but we need to really budget that really long term. And be hot on legacies. On top of that, we've got to be hot on our mid and major donors, but they're going to have some impact, but nowhere near as much as our legacies. It's all about legacies. So much so, John, actually, my little mantra at the moment is that all donor acquisition is subsidized bequest lead generation. It's a really good way to look at it, because there's so much more money in legacies than all the donations that they're ever going to give, that actually it's subs. And I don't want anybody coming away thinking, oh, right, we just need to go straight away and acquire legacy donors. Yeah. No. We need to get donors who are going to become legacies, and we know that people who've made multiple gifts and blah 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 are more likely to put us in our will. So basically, any good fundraising of getting people to donate is good legacy fundraising if we mention bequests and talk about or legacies and we talk about that. So that's my biggest bee in my bonnet really at the moment, is that really long-term thinking.
It's and I kind of want to like I don't there's so many things to unpack in there that you're saying. There's so many assumptions that are being built into your idea and your call to action, which is we can't, yes, short-term thinking, like you said, still brings cash in the door tomorrow. However, you can't just do that. And we were saying beforehand, a lot of our charity friends who are watching this maybe have just been in the job for every person I talked to was just joining this charity 3 months ago all the time. And how can you build in that long-term lens thinking when you think you might not even be at a job, or that board member that's bossing you around or has their ideas, same thing, are only going to be there for 14, 16, 20 months. And so I like the call to action, which is, even if that's so, we have a colleague in common who actually many years ago we worked with her on a legacy program, and this organization is being transformed, currently speaking, even though she left there 10 years ago because of the work that she did in that time, and she knew that's what she was doing. She
Yeah,
was
you never get to be the hero, do you?
no,
Because
no,
you're well gone by the time.
no.
I think that maybe as fundraisers should look at what is our legacy, and our legacy is legacies, really.
Mhm.
Even if you're not the legacy manager, even if you're the direct marketing acquisition manager, one of the other cool things is I reckon, I don't, mathematician want me data, blah, blah, blah. So this is just a gut, not an equation. But I reckon probably half of the value of your legacies is going to come in from just doing pretty minimum stuff, tick boxes, the fantastic supporter connection survey and following those surveys up. So not having lots of staff, not doing mass bequest mailings, but just doing the simple stuff, because a lot of legacy stuff is really good nudging. And that'll probably get you half really cheap. And you don't need a legacy manager to do that. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. You need a decent letter, and I've got a full template on how to do a letter. You just need a decent thank you letter. You don't even need a bequest pack. You need to know, never tell people certain things, like you can leave your legacy as a percentage of estate or a specified amount. Never say things like that. That's really not helpful. We really want to focus on particular types of legacies where all the value is and donors don't really care. So just tell them what we want them to do, because that's how you get closer, much larger averages. So there's a few things that we can do, which are all really cheap, and that's going to get us a lot of our legacies. The hard work that we have to do, the advanced work that we do for that last half, is still the best ROI of any fundraising activity, by the way, apart from that first half. It's still, and so you're going to get more money from doing that than pretty much anything you do. But that's where you have to argue for much more budget and stuff, and that gets a bit challenging. So the first thing to do is make sure you're ticking the boxes on all of the basics, basically. And then that's your legacy. And if someone comes in and does advanced bequests in 6 years' time, they will get the credit for it, because people from your program will start passing. But that's great. That's your legacy. It's good.
It's a beautiful message, and it's so good. I'm going to leave it right there, Sean. Thank you so much for your time, and that was beautiful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
See you, John. Catch you later. Bye bye, everyone.